Welcome back, Visions fans. Ready Player Will here. Today we're doing the character review for Hyoh, the brand new global exclusive unit. A lot of people are excited to see how it will actually perform, so here to give all of my comprehensive thoughts. Now, the typical presentation today, I'm going to go through the character overview, base and total stat analysis. I have added a new section here today talking about agility specifically. We'll talk about that more when we get there, all leading up to the report card where I grade these stats in the context of the rest of his kit as well, which is kind of a preview to the class job overview where we talk about the abilities, get to know him better. I do have a little subset here of a niche that I think he could potentially shine in, a little bit of theory crafting, but then we're going to go through the general thoughts to kind of summarize everything in totality and finish things off with some optimization pieces about potential job-based vision cards, Esper Synergies, and weapon optimization. So kicking things off, brand new fire unit. They gave him the Empire's Elite unique main job with Lancer and Knight as the two sub-jobs. He does equip great swords with armor, helm, and accessories, so a little more durable in terms of what he puts on for equipment. He's got a move of 3, a jump of 1 as, again, another 100 cost unit. Now, from a resistance standpoint, a lot of double-digit resist here, which is good to see. Strongest is the 20% to missile, 15% to magic is the second highest, 10% to slash and strike, both obviously really good, and minus 10 to pierce being the only real negative, and it is one to absolutely be concerned about. Now, in my opinion, he is a 50 faith unit. That being said, I really do think you actually could go as high as 70 or 97. We'll talk about why. So from that perspective, the status elements are a potential consideration. 50% to frostbite, obviously very popular against ice units. 50% to disable, which is very popular on, let's say, King Mon and some fire units, which is one of his niches, is to counter both of those elements. How good he does, kind of up for debate. But the 10% to paralysis, also kind of nice. I'm going to come back to that later. Now, we talk about the base stats overall. HP perspective is kind of right in the middle here, maybe a smidge lower on the spectrum for what you might normally expect from a great sword user. The attack stat, definitely on the higher end of the spectrum, not the best, not the worst, but certainly in a good spot where he is going to benefit greatly from attack boosting things. From a base agility perspective, relatively average overall, neither good nor bad. The dexterity, again, kind of the same concept, right around the average, nothing crazy, and the same thing for luck, so very middle in a lot of these stats, which could be good, could be bad. We'll see how it affects the rest of his kit, but as we kind of transition those into a chart that shows the relative strengths and weaknesses all together, one note I want to mention here, I did change the way that I grade the HP here. I took out the top 6 health pools to better define where these characters fall on the spectrum of all URs. So if you do look at the resolve video compared to this one, going to be a little weird, the percentage there. I did that really because there are some tank outliers where their health pool is just so big, it makes everyone else kind of look whatever. Again, as we see here, a lot of these stats relatively average, just the attack stat on the higher side of things. When we go to look at what the board stats and board nodes add, though, not a lot of massive changes, honestly, all relatively the same, but you just hate to see a 100 cost unit with kind of average agility, dexterity, and luck in the kit innately. And if you're looking at the board, a couple things really relatively average. 6 agility on the board is basically the average. Same with 47 dexterity and 53 luck, nothing too crazy there. There is a slight misprint here. There is a further attack stat from the board nodes, but that shouldn't change anything that you get here on the screen. It's just know that there's a misprint. But as we start to look at the other stats here, we're going to talk about agility first and foremost. So this is one that I wanted to dive into because it's obviously one of the most important things about the characters, and I wanted to quantify it a little more than I had in the past. This is a character's agility if you assume that they have 15% vision card on the main slot and 8% agility on the vision card sub slot. And obviously you want to take into account whether characters have passives or not as well. Now Hyoh, if you decide to not include his passive, does overall come relatively low compared to most other units, particularly when you consider that they might have their passive. So this triangle where you see my cursor, characters that can get up to 90 agility, he'll still be stuck around like that 77. Now if you do have his agility passive on, obviously does give him a pretty good bump, but the long and short of it is, even with those vision cards, innately not terribly more accurate than any other character. He's honestly pretty average to really below average. Now, as you look at the crit hit and crit avoid, one of the very odd things about this character is that from a board nodes perspective, they did not give him any critical hit rate board nodes, which they usually give damage dealers. So his innate critical hit rate scales purely off the dexterity stat, which is kind of like average to below average, and really is very bad because he loses out on that, let's say 20 crit rate or so that most characters get, which certainly would put him where you normally see this triangle. And the crit avoid rate, you know, that luck stat being where it is really nothing to amplify it. He's relatively low on the crit avoid rate as well. So stats a little bit left to be desired, particularly from the accuracy perspective, he is amongst some of the worst accurate characters in the game, unfortunately. There are some asterisks and saving graces, which I will talk to about how you can potentially get that up and why this is maybe slightly misleading, but honestly not terribly far off from how you want to think of him. He also has no passives that can boost that accuracy, so even with passives, he falls even further in comparison to the other units in the game. Now, evasion perspective, again, no luck stat, or very low luck stat, so not even an evade unit in the least, which leads us to the report card overall. So effective HP, he has to go a little on the higher side here. I'm going B+ overall. He's got no innate defense or spirit and no passives to boost either. That being said, he has 10 AoE resistance on his mastery ability, 15 AoE resistance on his passive. You could get a second passive with more, but probably not recommended. He does have courage as a form of survivability, and he does have a 50% counter where he can heal back 30% of his health pool. So overall, he does skew just a smidge higher on the magic side, in my opinion, if only because 10% to pierce actually is a pretty big demerit from a physical perspective, considering how strong some of the pierce units are and what's projected to come out. Even though he doesn't have any defense and spirit, he is obviously boosted comparatively by a lot of those double-digit resists, as well as the health pool being above average when you add the board and whatnot. Now, the primary stat, I am going an A, but big asterisk on here. The base attack is pretty good. He's got a main passive that bumps him up by another 24%, a buff that'll give him another 40%, but no innate defense penetration at all. It's literally on a buff, which is very bad in my opinion, but strictly speaking, from a primary stat, sure, it's an A, but if you don't have that defense penetration up, his damage is going to suffer greatly. Now, agility, as mentioned, I'm going with a C here overall, with the passive slightly above average just a little bit, but without it, pretty bad, and I use that because most characters, in order to be good, have to be competitive with the turn order of things, and if he's getting lapped by characters, that's obviously very, very bad. Now, accuracy, I'm going with an F. Extremely inaccurate. He does have a 100% hit chance on the sub, but it's very limited in range and application. There's ways to recover from that, but it's not really consistent. When he gives himself courage, he does gain 30 accuracy percent, which would bump him up significantly here. His vision card also gives him 15 if it's in the main slot, so sure, have courage active and have that buff. Give yourself that 45% accuracy, different grade, but you're not always going to have that vision card in the main slot, if equipped at all, and you're not always going to have your courage applied. Not to mention, it is dispellable. Even if you have courage active, you can dispel the 30% accuracy. So again, going with an F overall. Now, evasion, also an F, will not dodge anything, don't even attempt to try. The movement, I'm going with a C, base movement, no way to alter it whatsoever. The passives, I'm going with a B here. The passives aren't bad, just not enough to make up for the deficiencies in his kit. On paper, you could do a lot worse than what he has. We'll see that in a second, but you really were hoping for some stronger passives to make up for some of the grades that you see statistically. Now, the counter abilities, I'm going with a C+ here. The heal back counter is okay, but it only lasts for 3 turns. But the other counters, in my opinion, are below average. One of them is okay. And again, C+, I'm making it sound like it's the end of the world. It's not. But relatively speaking, the unique passive they gave him is not very good. Now, overall kit, I am going with an A- here. The main job does have some likable things. The subjobs are definitely meh. They don't really add a lot. And even on the overall kit, although there is some good utility, a lot of it is kind of redundant with what we see in the game currently. I'll talk more about that soon. But the final grade I'm going to give him is a B-. Overall, very niche upsides in my opinion. He feels like a 100-cost unit that they made a year ago, quite honestly. Not the kind of unit that they made post 3rd anniversary, where we see what the newer 100-cost units typically have to set the bar. That being said, I do think he is tuned and made with the intention of future game balance, as well as what's in the permanent pool for fire. I'm going to talk about that more in my general thoughts though. So let's get into the actual job and abilities themselves. So the passive abilities, Merciless Heart is a very good passive. 24% attack, slash res pen of 40, AoE resistance of 15, awesome. The rest of these though, only a couple that you could really lean into. Abandoned Bonds I think is almost a must because of that 12% agility. The HP of 12% certainly is nice. The other 3 I think you could entertain. Obviously Divine Protection is great for the extra AoE resistance. That debuff res also stacks with Trust Stone passives and Vision Card passives, so maybe you can get a little creative there. Deadly Mastery I think is okay. Obviously his crit rate suffers, so adding this kind of gets him back to like an average amount, but I don't think average is a good place to be. And then Night Lore would kind of be overkill in my opinion for the slash res pen. Would keep him at a permanent 80, which is cool, but I just don't know if that's worth the loss in agility. Now we look at the counter abilities. The one that gave him uniquely is the Beast's Reflex. It's a preemptive ability, 30% chance to proc. But number one, it's only against physical damage. But number two, it's only 2 squares away. It's far too limited in range and application. And counter thrust is actually the same thing in terms of range. So I don't like these at all. Sword guard is probably my favorite, where it's the 20% chance to reduce the damage taken by 30%. I think that one's probably the most consistent out of this group. Now, the unlocked counter that you get when you use his buff, it's a 50% chance to proc a 30% heal of whatever your total health pool is. So this actually is pretty nice for effective HP overall. That being said, again, you can mitigate this by 2 ways. Either healing power down or reaction block would drastically neuter this and completely change his survivability. Now, the main job buffs, there are 2 here that are honestly okay, I guess. Veiled Defiance is his courage ability. The accuracy and slash attack here, slash attack at 25, accuracy 30. That's like cool, I guess. I just would have rather seen this somewhere else in his kit or in his stats rather than wasting a whole buff on it. The buffs that other characters get are way more impactful. This is kind of the bare minimum nowadays. And Beast's Roar, although this is cool for the attack buff percentage and the defense pen for himself and allies, I absolutely hate the fact that it's his only form of defense penetration in his kit. Again, this wears off after 3 turns, it can be dispelled, and that drastically changes the damage output. He also gains the counter ability from this buff though, so this is where you get that heal back. So overall, I am not a huge fan of what these buffs do in comparison to what the game offers at the top end of things, as well as what 100 cost units more recently have gotten. Now, the main job offensive abilities, Soul Blade here, kind of whatever. 13 is pretty cheap from an AP perspective, but attack debuff of 43% is relatively mundane. Heat Drive, you know, again, a year ago, this probably would have been a lot better. Break physical barrier, but it's only single target. There's so much AoE barrier break at the moment that just makes it better. Although this is a 200% modifier, and it's got a nice range of 5 squares away, 28 AP is a little bit costly, and that's going to be a recurring theme here where a lot of these are very expensive from an AP perspective. Burning Drive, in my opinion, actually is a very good ability. It's a nice giant AoE diamond here, reduces the counter chance by 100, is a defense break of 25, and decreases the healing power of 40 for targets. So although this is kind of the upside to him not having the innate defense penetration, is that he can reduce the defense. And so if you have a character who has 25 defense and you reduce it by 25, then defense pen means nothing. It's kind of the resolve problem I was talking about yesterday with slash res pen. She has no slash resistance penetration in her kit, but she's got an imperil ability of 25. And so sure, if someone has slash res at 25 and you bring them down to 0, the penetration doesn't matter because they're at 0. But when you run into tanks and other high defense units, that comes to bite you very quickly. And then Unknown Trader, also actually a very good ability, quite honestly. This is one of those more unique mechanics where it is technically a unit resistance scaling attack, so it scales off unit res, but you can hit 2 people. And when you do, it's Dispel Haste and Dispel Re-Raise, 200% modifier, and if you kill them, you will actually regenerate 15 AP for each person you kill. But again, 32 AP, relatively expensive. Again, the main job does have a lot of things that are pretty likable about it. Now we get into the sub-jobs, Empire's Elite. You get a little bit better here with the AP economy coming in at 26 and 24 AP. I don't think Gloomblade is good at all. To me, decreased agility is really good when it means that you can get the edge on someone in the turn order, but because he's very average for his agility, even if you were to reduce the agility of a fast unit, that's not going to really change exactly how much they get on you in terms of lapping potential, or changing the turn order, if you will. And he's not a big crit hit unit, so decreasing crit evade also doesn't mean a lot as well. The Languishing Plume at least has that cross-shape AoE. Chance to inflict slow is decent enough, I guess. That's kind of the debate of the faith argument here. I just don't think this sub-job is necessarily strong enough to have on for him. Which brings us to the Lancer sub-job. And again, this sub-job I don't think really adds anything all that terribly valuable. I think Vacuum Slash is really it from the 100% hit chance. At least has the, the crit rate increase to 25, which again is fine, but I don't think it's going to change him a lot. It's just relatively limited for range. So I do like the Lancer sub-job, I think, for kind of mitigating some of that poor accuracy overall. But even then, this is not a very reliable way to hit someone. And that brings us finally to Knight, which I actually think is my favorite sub-job, but not by much. And it's really A, because I do like this buff a lot. The problem he's going to run into is you have to decide how many buffs you can use, and being a slow character, you're realistically only going to get 1 or 2 buffs off, so you have to be very picky. That being said, max HP increased, the debuff res for elemental imperils, and the healing power of 30 will help his heal back if you are able to use that second buff and get that healing back. And the only reason why I like this job is simply because the AP cost of many of these abilities are lower than what you see. So from the perspective that as the battle goes on, when you get closer to the end of it, I think it's nice to lean into some of these abilities, and then you get the potential to disable someone which Arm Break I think is probably the best ability here. That's kind of that faith argument as well. But either way, I'm really like reaching for straws on where this is good. Now we look at niche number 1. I thought this is like one of the coolest things when I first saw this character, and I was putting some pieces together. I'm going to throw up a couple attributes here, and hopefully you follow along and go with me on where his niche application actually might be very handy. Now, number 1, Heat Drive is a single target break physical barrier. That's clue number 1. Number 2, that passive I just mentioned is 100% debuff res, so that you will not get element imperiled at all. So you cannot have like ice res down or earth res down, anything like that. You also have 15% magic resistance innately. You also have 10% paralysis resistance innately. You also have this ability where you can dispel auto revive. For those of you that want to guess where I think his niche is in terms of where he might potentially shine, it is the Skahal meta, where I actually think he might do very well for you. Now, I haven't tested this, I'm just kind of mind-mocking this. And again, if you're looking at why, number 1, Resnick has the physical shield that she puts on Skahal. Heat Drive was able to break it. Number 2, Skahal's main offensive ability is a 38% lightning imperil. That means that Hyoh will not take that imperil at all. Obviously, magic res is Skahal's main damage type, and Skahal's limit break is 25% chance to paralyze. Now, if Hyoh is 50 faith, that means that there's only a 22% chance that he will ever get paralyzed by Skahal, so drastically reduced. You also see Skahal commonly with the zombie TMR, which gives him that re-raise, that this ability at the bottom does have the potential to dispel that zombie mask. The agility of Hyoh is also in line with that lightning team. Hyoh is 82 with that passive, Skahal is only 75, Summer Helena is only 77. So yeah, he may fall behind against those faster units, but that lightning team is not one of those teams. Skahal is also minus 5% slash res, and that team, Resnick, Skahal, and a third, is typically not run with a tank, so the lack of permanent defense penetration isn't really an issue because you're not encountering a lot of high defense units. So again, very nice application, but I thought the stars aligned perfectly when I was looking at this. Now, the Limit Break, the Dream, and the Mastery ability. The Limit Break is a triple hit, 49 AP, 5 squares away, slash res pen of 40 for 3 turns. It's fine. Obviously, good chaining potential. I don't think there's anything amazing or awful about it. I just think it's a pretty solid ability that does help him out. The Mastery ability here is where you see some of the secondary niches, where you get fire and ice res of 10%. So sure, maybe he'll thrive, obviously, against countering ice, but fire should do that anyway. This just would do it a little easier, I guess. And the fire res I actually don't really like, because fire's main strength is evasion metas, and he's awful, absolutely awful against those evasion teams. So I guess you would counter fire teams that are only like magic oriented, which is kind of the minority. The acquired AP of 30% certainly is helpful, but as we saw, everything's very expensive from an ability perspective. I don't know if that's enough to make up for it. The Dream ability I do think is a must for him. It is for any character, really. 15 slash attack certainly does help his damage output. The AoE resistance to 10 certainly helps his survivability as well. So yes, thumbs up to using the Dream ability if you want to use him. Now, the TMR review, this actually is one of the shining spots of the character, in my opinion. I actually think this is a very, very good TMR. Obviously very well-rounded statistically, but I love the element res for fire and ice of 20%. Even if not on Hyoh in particular, when you are encountering this fire meta at the moment, this is a very valuable buff to help mitigate the damage. The defense of 20 certainly helps as well, but more than anything, I love the AoE spread on this. It's so flexible for how you can potentially run to your teammates and use it. 2 big thumbs up for this TMR. I think it is very, very handy for fire and ice metas. Now, my general thoughts overall. No good. I actually think he's a good permanent pool fire unit for the general player base, not the top end of the game. And let me kind of explain the rationale on this. Most of the strongest fire tools that we've had are now recently limited, and while most things that make elements good are also limited, mostly everything's limited in this game, fire really in particular, the Sorrow Vision card is a must for any fire team that's going to be performing at that meta level. Sorrow, obviously one of those characters as well. Yuffie's a limited character, so is the Vision card that we just got for free from her. Death Machine, being that 20 AoE resistance, is limited to the Final Fantasy 1 banner. The point I'm trying to get to is, if you were to rewind the clock 5 months from all the things that Fire got recently, Fire was very bad 5 months ago. So for new players that come into the game, Fire is still a very bad element, the way it had always been compared to the other elements. And so I think Hyoh is actually a really good addition from a permanent perspective, that, yeah, if you omit the top end of the fire meta with a fire evade at the moment and just look purely at like the permanent pool, Hyoh is actually a very, very strong addition for fire in the game. That being said, tons of weaknesses overall, and in my opinion, the kit isn't strong enough to overcome them. He really does feel like an older 100 cost unit, not a post 3rd anniversary 100 cost unit. I do think the lack of permanent defense penetration is a massive downside. That buff can wear off or be dispelled. The main kit overall does have some strong utility, you know, good slash synergy with a lot of the other fire characters. It obviously will benefit greatly from their vision card selection. I do caution people on the AP management. 30% acquired AP on the mastery. He does get 10 initial AP on the weapon, which we'll see in a second, but the skills being quite costly, I think is something you genuinely have to look out for. If you suddenly have to use bells in order to get him to be feasible, well then the rest of those buffs really become kind of useless. The courage, you're never going to have a chance to use it because it's so far down to the priority. The heal back buff, it's going to be kind of whatever, and that's a buff that you're going to use multiple times in succession, which I hate. If you have a character that comes close in the turn order, Hyoh will move to them to reapply the buff, and then you never get to the end of the other buff. You know, honestly, probably a good PvE unit, but Fire is so stacked, it's already hard to fit in. So it's hard to give him a thumbs up with a ton of value when Fire already has a massive amount of PvE value and synergy from what's available. I don't know if he really adds a whole ton in addition to that. Obviously, he has the slow potential and the agility down potential, which are good things for PvE, but so don't many of the other Fire characters. Now, niche application for lightning magic, as I kind of walked through there, and obviously potentially do for variations of ice and fire, but that's why I say variations, because against the fire evade teams, he's going to be very, very bad. But against some of the fire magic-oriented teams, I guess, like, he could be pretty decent. But it's niche. But finally, I think this is the biggest thing I'm trying to keep an open mind about. He seems like a unit whose utility would be best in a fire, lightning, greatsword comp somewhere in the future. Now, his vision card, we're going to see in a second, also seems to support this with the self buffs that it gives him and the buffs on the card and the synergies and jobs on the card. So from that perspective, when you look at the potential synergies with fire and wind and fire and lightning based upon Dark Ifrit and Dark Tetra, as well as some of the greatsword units that what he has in common with them, I want to keep an open mind that I think that's where his potential lies, but that does seem a far way away. Now, talking about that in particular, his vision card, again, gives him 3 agility, which he needs speed, so it's cool that he gets 3 agility on this. That's legit. He gets an additional 30% acquired AP, so again, we're talking about weaknesses. This helps that weakness significantly. He gets 15 accuracy, helps a lot. That's one of the weaknesses. Attack 20%, certainly nice, but the defense pen of 10, also very nice. So now he gets 10 from the vision card, 10 from a Trust Stone passive, 40 from the buff. The Dark Ifrit vision card also has defense penetration on it, so again, you get that as well. All of a sudden, it's a lot more respectable. And you look at the party effects, 18% agility. That's the highest agility percent you get in the game right now, so certainly helps him from a speed perspective relative to the other 15% cards. Crit rate of 20, which is one of his weaknesses, and magic res 20, which appears to be one of his niche strengths. So again, this vision card on a main slot for him seemingly like fixes all of his deficiencies, but in order to run this, you need to run it with other similar job eligible units and units that can overlap the wind and lightning element. And again, just kind of highlighting all of these things are weaknesses that the card seemingly does a good job at least kind of fixing, or at least normalizing. I won't say fixing. And you consider those great sword lightning synergies, Esther and Cloud, respectable units. You look at wind, who are eligible for this card, Jum and Ayaka. Absolutely, if Ayaka can haste him and pocket him with healing, literally nothing wrong with that. Super fun synergy. Ayaka, one of her buffs is to give an ally 50 defense penetration. Wow, funny coincidence, huh? That she can do that and this dude has no innate defense penetration. You also consider that the regular Firecast themselves, King Mont is on this card. That's a great synergy. So is In Sorrow. Also does great things. And maybe less so, but you also have some strong dark characters that also benefit from this card. So you go Dark Fina or Stern or Lemre. Probably the weakest argument out of this group of people, but those are solid units. They benefit pretty well. But again, when we look at the rest of the Great Sword cards, there actually are some cards that are pretty decent here. Wish on a Winter Night. This is more of a sub-vision card. But again, you talk about that Pierce resistance that he has. We'll put this on the sub. That Pierce res drops to 10. All of a sudden, he's at 0 Pierce res. He gets the Human Killer, and this ability is a magic shield. Oh wow, good against magic, who would have thought? Also decreases AP consumption by 40% for 3 turns. Wow, AP management, one of his weaknesses. Who would have thought to put 2 and 2 together? So again, like, something to be said there. There's also the Resolve card coming out this week. Again, probably more of a sub-vision card, but you get that attack buff, you get that extra accuracy buff. And then the 4th card here is technically on a magic unit you might put in your party, but this is your AoE resistance of 20 that you need to make a brand new party. So like, I can see some pieces here from a greatsword perspective where you might be able to make a team and fit him in and allow his utility to speak for himself, obviously just not against evasion, or at least he not against evasion. Which gets us finally to the Esper Synergies. Again, you're going to look for fire attack, slash attack, human killer, attack percent, accuracy, and then matchup specific things. And I do think you should consider Pierce Res as a primary motivator, where Flagbearer Glaciella is like not going away. There's obviously a lot of other units that now have like Pierce attacks on their sub-jobs as well. So my de facto 3 are Dark Ifrit, Dark Odin, and regular Odin. Dark Ifrit, you don't have to use the evasion nodes on him. You could obviously use like fire attack, reaction block rate, slash attack. There's a couple other good ones here. Dark Odin, again, has magic resistance on it, seeing a trend. Also has the human killer and slash attack. And regular Odin has the accuracy and the human killer as well. Some other niche Espers I think you could consider. Phoenix and Brachiosaur, to be honest. Phoenix, probably more for the future where it has strike res on it, but currently you can still get your fire attack and defense, so certainly bulks them up. Brachiosaur adds crit rate as well as the fire attack. Not my favorite of these Espers, but throwing it on here is an option, which then blends us to some of the chunkier options. Golem obviously has like human killer, also has pierce res on it. It's just very slow. I would try to stick toward the faster Espers. Leviathan though, also that pierce res. And the cool thing about Leviathan in particular, I think is interesting for fire matchups that are the non-evade kind, but Leviathan does have that innate fire resistance against it as well, so for what that's worth. Finally leading to Death Machine, who actually has legit fire res and defense and slash attack and a couple other good notes. So I think there's some things to play with here. I would still probably stick to the Espers that are like 17 agility or above, but just being comprehensive. Now we talk about the weapon optimization. The Feather Duster, I'm kidding, it's called the Ultimate Bringer, but Feather Duster seems appropriate as well. This is a okay sword, I guess. You know, initial AP of 10 for him is certainly welcome. Ice Killer of 20. I don't want to say overkill, like fire should already beat ice pretty handily, but sure, this helps do it more efficiently. There's nothing wrong with that. Slash attack 15 is okay. In terms of which one is the best build, I'm probably thinking assault here. I don't think 18 accuracy is material enough to ever really like try to put it on him. I would just go Alex Ring and something else to boost the accuracy. So probably just lean into the assault. Maybe the critical rate if you're able to kind of like fudge your way up to a higher critical rate overall, but he's not really a big high crit unit, so I'd probably just stick with assault. Now for the secondary options, I bring up Asterisk Alpha, but I think this is kind of unnecessary. It's less attack. The thing here is that you get 30 slash res pen, but he's already got 40 on the passive. He's another 40 on the limit break. I feel like 30 here is kind of overkill. Glacial Crown gives 20 slash res pen, so it's kind of just straight inferior to this. So I'm really just sticking to the Feather Duster. I'm kidding. Ultimate Bringer at all times as far as greatsword options go. But that's the Hyoh character review in a nutshell. Again, I wish I was kind of more excited and hopeful for his practical usage. I don't think he's going to really do much in the short term of the game, but again, I think there are some breadcrumbs here that as the game goes on for a longer period of time, which again is why he is a permanent pool unit, he'll actually start to yield some of the benefits here that when we look in hindsight, we'll be like, all right, he's actually not the worst unit in the world. Nor am I trying to say that right now. It's just relatively speaking to what else we get, he is definitely like a tier below where most other characters come out of the gate from. But that's it for now. Thanks for watching. Hopefully this was insightful and thorough. Obviously, probably my longest video in a while for a character review. But that's it for now. I'll talk to y'all soon.